Hello, everybody. I am back again with Parker Settecase. Parker is the host of Parker's Pensies, a YouTube channel and podcast. Parker has been on my channel before. Last time we talked mainly about the Trinity and social Trinitarianism and personhood and group persons and stuff like that. But we sort of, I think, the note that we left off on was that we needed to talk about Jordan Peterson sometime, because we'd kind of hoped to talk about that but didn't get to it the first time. And so Parker put out a video that I think is like basically you sort of reading through or kind of summarizing a paper that you had written about Jordan Peterson's theology, philosophy, it's some combination of those two things, and the evolutionary argument against naturalism, and how there's the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which we'll get into, which I associate with Plantinga, and I think has been developed by other people since then, sort of lurks behind and undercuts some of what he's saying. And I also think it's just very similar to the problem of why can't Jordan Peterson seemingly call himself a Christian. It seems like it's like two versions of the same problem. So I think that this will be really interesting to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about the Trinity a little bit, because Peterson does seemingly have thoughts on the Trinity. It's interesting, it comes up sometimes. But anyway, the first question I wanted to ask you is how'd you get into Jordan Peterson, and what do you find interesting about him?
Yeah, well, dude, before we jump in, thanks again for having me on the podcast. This is really fun, and thanks for listening to the episode on this. This is a fun one for me. I got into Peterson 2016 maybe. I had some friends who are Canadian apologists, and they shared this page with me in support of Jordan Peterson, something like that, on Facebook. And I was like, cool, free speech, that's great. Who's this guy? Checked him out. Heard some of his lectures and was like, hey guys, isn't he like he's like a liberal theologian? Like what's going on here? And they were like, shh, don't bring that stuff up right now. This is like a free speech issue. So I was like, whatever, dude, I don't really like this guy. I don't want him spreading, all this terrible stuff. And so I kind of put him down for just put him off to the side for like 6 months or so. And I started listening to his stuff again, because I saw he was creeping back in. And I was like, man, this stuff's really interesting. His take on stuff is pretty fascinating. So I've listened to lots and lots and lots. I won't say all, because he's put out a ton, but lots of his stuff. One thing particularly interesting was he was talking about social anxiety, and some people in my family have social anxiety, and he was giving it a mythological spin, and it was just really interesting. He talked about the crowd being like a dragon, and it's got like 1,000 eyes, and it's judging you, and it's mythological, obviously, and it's metaphorical, but it's so interesting to think about. Holy cow, that's right. And if you think of the party as a dragon, and you're going to slay the dragon, not by force or anything like that, but you're going to find some tools to go out there and stop those eyes from judging you, that's really helpful. If you had that frame of mind when you went out to social settings, you would be helped. And you're using like this mythological kind of imaginary tool to do so. So I thought a lot of that stuff's fascinating. All the Disney stuff is really interesting, archetypes and stuff. And I read Maps of Meaning and saw that he had a lot in common with one of my favorite theologians, Kevin Vanhoozer, and C.S. Lewis, and others who look at the world in two different ways: a world for a form for action, and a world as a place of things, science and mythology. And yeah, so all that to say, it was really a lot of his stuff is really fascinating, and I've been able to use that on college campus as I share my faith with people. Guys will say, well, have you ever heard of Jordan Peterson? I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've heard of him. What do you want to talk about? And come to find out, I've read any book that he's come out with. I've listened to most of his lectures, and so it's a great jumping off tool for evangelism.
Yeah, that's really cool. I got into Jordan Peterson just sort of slightly before he became famous. I was I like listening to YouTube lectures and stuff like that. I mostly do like computer programming or math and stuff for my day job, and sometimes it's the sort of work where you can listen and work pretty well at the same time. And so I was I don't know, I was looking for a lecture. I typed Kierkegaard lecture into the YouTube search algorithm because I was really on a Kierkegaard stint at the time. And so I was like, I wanted a good, nice long lecture from an academic person. And one of the ones that popped up was from Peterson's, I think his Maps of Meaning course, right? Videos that were up on the time. I'm like, well, it's a psychology professor. And, I would prefer a philosophy or theology one, but whatever, I'll give this one a whirl. And I remember being like, that is the most interesting and compelling professor I have ever heard. Just after one lecture, I'm like, and I've already been to grad school at this point. and so I was like, wow. So I just started at the beginning of his course and listened to the whole thing. And by the time I was like getting to the end of his course, there was like the videos on the Canadian politics stuff.
Oh,
I'm
wow,
like,
dude.
I don't really care about his thoughts on Canadian provincial politics. That's not really my business. I like when he talks about the Lion King. And then like he just started exploding, right? Like thing after thing after thing was happening. And he like just rocketed into public consciousness. And then he did his biblical series. And I'll say this because evolution will be a very central topic to our conversation today, that I grew up in, a church that was very much good taught creationism, some form of, 6-day-ish creationism. And that was a big part of like my identity in high school, was that I didn't believe in evolution. Right. And I remember I went to public schools. I was the kid who would ask pesky questions to the biology teacher. And I read like Michael Behe and, the intelligent design folks and stuff like that. And I knew how to poke and prod, poor unsuspecting high school biology teachers and stuff like that. And I thought I was pretty cool and stuff like that. And then in college, I had something like, I don't know, I just like got convinced, I guess, that evolution just really had to be true. And it was really sort of the first, I don't know, intellectual test of my faith, maybe I would say, going through that, because it's like, well, what does that mean? How is Genesis true? Can it be true in some different sense, or do I have to throw the whole thing out? All those sorts of questions. And I'm by no means the only person who's wrestled with those questions before. It's almost kind of cliche at this point. But I felt like I had sort of settled into a slightly comfortable, if not fully explained place of like, Genesis must just be true in some kind of way. Maybe John Walton's right. Maybe, it's like more about like the ordering of, God's creative temple or something like that. Or maybe it's like, the true version of like ancient Babylonian creation myths, but it's not like literally, it's like I had loose things like that in my mind. And then when Jordan Peterson started talking about Genesis, I felt like he was helping address that question in a more rigorous and interesting and thorough way than I had been able to before. And that was what I found the most interesting about him, I guess, was him connecting the dots between religion and evolution and biology and Genesis and all of that stuff. So that's really like, honestly, the political stuff, sometimes I could take or leave. And I honestly wish sometimes he'd just stay away from that, because it gets him in trouble and stuff like that and gets him distracted. I'm like, just do Exodus, man. Just do your Exodus commentary. I don't care about these political culture wars nearly as much as a huge chunk of your audience. So that's sort of my background of how I got interested in Peterson. And I lead a discussion group here in the Chicago area about Jordan Peterson and stuff like that. So I still follow him pretty closely, although honestly, I don't listen to everything he puts out anymore. But
I've had the same reaction. I don't know why, but since he's come back, I'm kind of just pick and choose. I think probably because he's putting out so many and he's doing so many interviews, right? And it's like, I kind of just want to hear you go off about something. I've listened to Joe Rogan interview people, but he's not the best interviewer either. I'll say that, because
it's true.
He's got a lot to say himself. So he'll hey, Jocko Willink, here's a question, and it's going to be a 30-minute question. It's like, that's cool, man, but people should really be interviewing you.
Yes, yeah, it's a good point. He's a very interesting conversation partner, but he's not a good interviewing podcast host.
No.
Yeah,
That's funny.
Yeah. So let's talk about. So I remember, let's see here, back when I was doing my whole evolution exploration phase, I remember I read this book, which is called Science and Religion, Are They Compatible? Daniel Dennett and Alvin Plantinga. And coming across the evolutionary argument against religion, I think this is because this is such an important part of your paper about Peterson. Let's probably go through and explain what the evolutionary argument against naturalism is.
Yeah. So it's kind of hard to, I don't want to say the whole thing. So I say EAAN, and I don't like the way that sounds either, but it's better than having to say the evolutionary argument against naturalism. So EAAN, dang, I hate that too. It's an argument developed by Alvin Plantinga, but can find its roots kind of in C.S. Lewis. He's got a similar argument that's called the argument from reason, and it goes back really, I would say the grandfather is Arthur James Balfour of the Balfour Declaration. He was a British prime minister, which is crazy, but he was a really good philosopher as well.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he's a really, really good philosopher as well. And but he's really pulling from Darwin's doubt as well. Darwin's doubt is now this huge big thing, but it's just Darwin saying, hey, can we trust our brains if they're really just a product of ape, the ancestors of an ape brain, or something like an ape? Do we attribute true beliefs to apes? Well, no. So should we attribute true beliefs to ourselves? I don't know. And that was kind of Darwin's doubt. And then philosophers have gone on to develop that. So
Darwin himself was, in some sense, nascently aware of this. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and people have been aware of it for a long time. And this is why I like philosophy, because the philosophers have been wrestling with this for a while, and it kind of went out of style, or people forgot about it. But the biologists kind of just grab evolution and go, all right, sweet, it fills in a lot of gaps, blah, blah, blah. And the philosophers go, hang on 1 second. If this is true, can we trust our theories at all? If this is true, why should we trust our theories? Should we? And so Plantinga came along, and he's a very good analytic philosopher. And he says maybe he's not the smartest guy in the world, but he sticks with stuff longer than everyone else. That's kind of his own thing. He's very smart. He's just being humble there. But he developed this argument into a probability argument using some Bayesian reasoning and stuff. But it's really not that important to go into that stuff right now. I have his most mature argument. It's gone through several revisions as philosophers have come through and given him pushback. His most mature one comes from where the conflict really lies. It's I think it's his last book, his latest book. I believe he's got some cognitive stuff going on, cognitive decline. He's like 90 years old now. But so this, I think, was his last book. And so premise one is just the probability of our cognitive faculties being reliable on naturalism and evolution is low. So we have these cognitive faculties help us think. The probability that those would be reliable, that they would reliably produce true beliefs, that's going to be low on the combination of naturalism and evolution. By themselves, maybe there's no problem. If you're just holding to naturalism, or if you're just holding to evolution, maybe theistic evolution, there might not be a problem. He doesn't address that. It's the combination of naturalism and evolution, which
right. Because that's an important point. It's not, he's not trying to disprove evolution, right? With this argument, he's not trying to say, therefore, obviously we didn't descend from apes or something like that. But he's saying within a purely naturalistic framework, and within a evolutionary account of our origins, it doesn't seem like we would have a reason to trust reason. Yeah. And if we don't have a reason to trust reason, then we can't trust reason. And if reason is how we know all of this, then maybe we can't know all of this, is basically the general idea. But there's some details why. So like why exactly does Plantinga argue that we can't trust reason?
Yeah. Okay. So he's going in on probabilities as well too. So he's saying it's probably low. So so premise one is the probability that our cognitive faculties will be reliable on naturalism and evolution is low. Anyone who accepts that, anyone who sees that that's a problem and holds to naturalism and evolution has a defeater for their cognitive faculties, the reliability. What do you call reason? Then 3, anyone who has a defeater for their cognitive faculties or they're being reliable, they have a defeater for any other belief that they think, including naturalism and evolution. And you did such a great job of summarizing this. But if your cognitive faculties are in question and your belief in naturalism and evolution was produced by your cognitive faculties, you have the snake biting its own tail. You're sawing off the branch that you're sitting on. You shouldn't believe those anymore. And so you have this defeater. You can't, naturalism and evolution together can't be rationally accepted because it destroys all your other beliefs. So why does he think that? Well, because the guiding principle of naturalistic evolution is survival of the fittest. And it's been more nuanced as philosophers of science and as evolutionists have come down the line, they've nuanced it more, but the guiding principle still is survival. So it doesn't really matter if you get to the truth, as long as you get to something close or approximates the truth or gets your body in the right place. And so there's this famous quote about the 4 F's. You need to get your body in the, you have to, in order to survive, you have to have these 4 F's, right? You have to feeding and reproducing, where there's a dirty joke in there, right?
Yeah.
But so that's all that matters in order for you to survive. Not that you know
that natural selection cares about action, right?
Exactly.
And location and function,
Mhm.
right? It's all about what you do and where you are and how you behave, right?
Mhm.
Evolution isn't looking inside your head to select you or unselect you or to reward you with children or to prevent you from having children.
Yeah.
It is only caring about your behavior, really, and
Yeah,
the
and I think-
behavior of those around you.
Exactly. And so people might argue, yeah, but having true beliefs will help you survive. So why wouldn't evolution why wouldn't it select for reliability of our cognitive faculties as a spandrel or as something that's helping us survive? Well, Plantinga gives this example of a frog, and I can't remember where he did. I'm pretty sure he did. Someone did. I'm pretty sure it was him. And if a frog has beliefs, like I don't think they probably have propositional beliefs, but let's say they do. If this frog thinks, hey, if I keep eating dragonflies, I'll turn into a frog prince. Now that's going to be a false belief. He's not going to turn into a frog prince. But if he continues to act on that false belief, he will survive, and he'll be a great big bullfrog, and he'll be able to pass his genes on and all that good stuff, as long as he keeps acting on that fake belief. So that one really doesn't match up with reality closely at all. But yet
Right.
it produces all the desiderata of survival. He will survive by acting on that false belief. So that's just a silly example, but it shows that the truth directedness and survival directedness of beliefs come apart, pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. You said this, the know how and the know what, right?
Yeah.
This is a big distinction in Peterson, and a big distinction that you were bringing in the paper. There's the knowing how to do something and the knowing what about it, right? Like, frogs need to eat flies. I know frogs are very important to you.
Right.
Frogs need to eat flies and a whole bunch of other things, apparently, that I didn't know frogs could eat. And so if they think that, just at the end of the next fly, that they will turn into, a prince or something like that, and that'll be wonderful, then that will motivate them to do the behavior, but the belief isn't there. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but then this could, of course, be something like how Sam Harris or someone could describe a lot of religious practices.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, well, Christians, or I'll just say Catholics go to church because they think that they need to eat and drink Christ's blood and body. And that's ridiculous, but it causes them to do this pro-social behavior that helps them make lots of friends and develop a rich social network, and that benefits them. The reason why they do it, right, is disconnected from perhaps the benefit. So religion might benefit them, but it's not for the reasons they think it is, or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then the whole problem is if Sam Harris does that, or if an atheist does that, then they chop their own feet out, because they're separating the benefit of an action from the belief of it, from the benefit of an action from the belief motivating that action. Mm-hmm. And if those things are really so splittable or dissectable, then there's no reason to believe any of our reasons or any of our cognitive faculties under naturalism and evolution.
Yeah, right. So they want to keep it local. They want to say just this belief, this religious belief. And yet what Al Plantinga's argument is doing is globalizing it and saying, hey, look, if you're a naturalist and an evolutionist, which doesn't really need to be spelled out that much unless you're a theist and you're a theistic evolutionist. There's not really another game in town. It's kind of either you are a creationist or theistic evolutionist, or just Darwinistic evolutionist, or naturalistic evolutionist. If you
I don't know many naturalists who don't believe in evolution.
Right.
Like Ayn Rand didn't, but I don't remember what her alternative was.
Right. So yeah, that's right. I'm thinking maybe Gödel too, but I'm not positive on that. So what Plantinga does is he globalizes that, and he does this kind of Sam Harris thing, but he globalizes it and says, okay, if you want to do that, kind of what you're saying, now we have a reason to doubt all of our cognitive faculties, because the process by which they were designed, blind watchmaker type stuff, was aimed at survival. It wasn't aimed at truth. And so why should we think that we can come to truth reliably if the process that you're affirming, it does not select for true beliefs, but selects for beliefs that help us survive? And so you've just given yourself a reason to doubt all of your beliefs, including naturalism and evolution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so how does this cut back to Peterson? Because Peterson is pretty naturalistic, but unlike, say, Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, he is much more amenable to religious ideas. And so I guess maybe this might be a good place to bring up Jordan Peterson's ladder of ascent, as you called it.
Yeah, totally. And I just want to say, obviously I love Jordan Peterson, and part of doing this is to get philosophers to start noticing him more too, and to take his work seriously. And so I'm trying to seriously criticize his work. I think that the more abstract Peterson goes, the worse he is. I think his more practical, the more and more he gets down to the individual and his clinical work. I like his mythology type stuff too, but the more abstract he gets, the more he gets towards the naturalistic evolutionary perspective, I think the worse his stuff is. And so what I'm critiquing here is his most abstract, from Maps of Meaning, where I think he just keeps going off the rails because of naturalistic evolution. And so his ladder of ascent, or ladder of development, I've called it a couple different things. I'm not sure if he specifically calls it anything, but it comes out in Maps of Meaning here and there. And I'll just read a quote from him. He talks about, it's basically this ladder from behavior to philosophical reflection on morality. And so he talks about, he says, behavior is imitated, then abstracted into play, formalized into drama and story, crystallized into myth, and codified into religion. Only then criticized in philosophy and provided post hoc with rational underpinnings. Explicit philosophical statements regarding the grounds for and the nature of ethical behavior, stated in verbally comprehensible manner, were not established through rational endeavor. And so he's saying that we get our morality from, we get our ethical behavior not from a series of rational dialogue and debate, but through abstracting what we already do and what our ancestors have already done. And it's actually a really interesting theory. person shared their apple with this person, and then the kid sees that and he starts doing that, and then all the way down through, as we are elevating up, as we are evolving and our frontal cortexes are getting bigger and bigger, we're able to put some more words to that, and then we make a story, because we can't do philosophy yet, but we have these dramas and stories, and then we come up with a formalized religion, and then only then, after that development, we can do philosophical reflection. It's really interesting. And given the social Darwinism of, how cultures evolve, given naturalistic evolution and Darwinistic evolution, it makes sense. Yet that's a really big problem, that it wasn't established through rational endeavor. That's what opens him up to Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Right. And this is a very important thing in Peterson's philosophy or theology or whatever you would call it, that reasoning is often happening after the fact and isn't often the motivating or driving force that we sometimes falsely give it credit for.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of this is from Jonathan Haidt, I think, who is one of Peterson's favorite psychologists or social psychologists or whatever exactly Jonathan Haidt is, of the rider and the elephant, right? Where, human psychology is like, there's an elephant who knows what it wants and does what it does. And the rider kind of sits on top as like the articulate person who's trying to describe what the elephant is doing, and sometimes tries to direct the elephant, but oftentimes the elephant mostly does what it wants, and the rider can only do so much to direct the elephant. And so our reasoning faculty is sort of sitting on top of our, I don't know, you could maybe say our animal self. And the animal self mostly knows already what it'll do, even if it can't really articulate it, right? It wants food, it wants to sleep, it needs to go to the bathroom, right? Whatever, right? And then our reasoning is sort of watching our own behavior and trying to describe it to itself and to other people, but it's not really in charge. It's only kind of in charge. Yeah. And so there's something of a condescending view of reason in there, but it's not like Peterson thinks reason is useless, but he thinks that it follows after action.
Yeah, exactly. And to his credit, man, he's opened my eyes to a lot of stuff like that. Like when he says you don't know everything you believe. I think that's true. I think that's like we think that we believe certain things, but our actions show otherwise. But there's all sorts of crazy stuff in epistemology, and there's all sorts of theories that can explain that and argue against that. But I think he's right in diminishing reason a little bit, just a little bit. We're not fully in control of what we believe, of what we see, of, like we reach out for a doorknob and our hands just like this, like we don't intentionally do that. It's just, there's muscle memory. I know people say that that's not true or whatever, but like our brains are all throughout our body, right? So Peterson helped me understand that kind of stuff, and I think that's a good corrective.
Yeah, and I think it perhaps protects him a little bit from the sharpest edges of the EAAN, right? Yeah. Because he already sort of has this idea that action can come first, right? And that evolution really is driving us towards having actions that survive. And because he's so pragmatically focused, he kind of gets that. But he still doesn't want to give up reason either. So even if he's probably less vulnerable than, say, Daniel Dennett or Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins to this sort of thing, I think you're right that he still is. So where does EAAN sort of cut into the ladder of Ascent?
Yeah. So an interesting thing about Peterson here too is I think he believes reason and abstract thinking is a spandrel. It's like a happy coincidence of the rest of the process, the processes going on in our brains. So Peterson,
could you define spandrel a little bit?
Yeah, it's like a thing that comes through evolution that wasn't the intended effect, but helps us survive nonetheless, or helps us with other. So mathematical reasoning is historically seen as a spandrel of evolution. Why did we need to think about non-real numbers and stuff like that? well, now it helps us survive, but it didn't help our ancestors think about that at all. It's just a spandrel. It's just a add-on that the rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing, right? So as we were, Peterson's story is really helpful for this. As uh, we were exploring territory, he always talks about unexplored and explored territory, and that's the basis for his order and chaos motifs. And he grounds that in the right hemisphere and left hemisphere of the brain. So uh, a really helpful thing for humans to survive is to map out territory in their mind instead of going out and expending energy and taking on the risk of running into a saber-toothed tiger. So Peterson, for him, our reasoning capacities for abstract thought and philosophical reflection, those came as a spandrel of abstract mapping. So if I can remember where I went yesterday, I'm going to think about that in my mind, and I'm going to think, oh yeah, there was this fruit tree over here. I can go do that. So he's doing abstract mental mapping, which is great. It makes a lot of sense that we would be able to do that, or have that function. Having that function would help us survive more. But because we started developing this tool of abstract mapping, we also developed this tool of abstract thinking. And then once you had abstract thinking, you could think about other abstract things like mathematics and like the good and all that kind of stuff. So in Peterson, that's another part of where our reasoning comes from. It's a happy accident. It's a happy add-on, a side effect of our ability to map things abstractly.
Right. Like it's like, I don't know, if you buy a hammer, you buy a hammer to be able to hit nails, right? And that's like the main purpose. But if it turns out that you can use a hammer, I don't know, I should have thought of this analogy. I don't know, if you can do something else fun and enjoyable with your hammer, but it's not the purpose for the hammer, it's like, well, that's a happy coincidence that rode along on top of the main driving thing. Yeah. So reason, like, our ancestors on the Serengeti weren't competing with each other to do calculus. And the people who could do calculus survived better than the people who could only do algebra, right? That no one really thinks that was true, but yet somehow we can do calculus. But if it was something like we're developing the ability to imagine ourselves, doing things in our head such that we didn't need to do it in person, right? It's better to let an idea die than to let yourself die, right? It's better to imagine, well, what if I tried to go over here and do this? Actually, that would probably turn out badly. I'm not going to do that, right? The simulator ability sort of our brain is, I think, where Peterson really thinks that a lot of our reasoning came from. If the purpose of the simulator in our brain was to be able to imagine lots of different courses of action, evaluate them, and then pick the best ones based off of our imagined, outcome for those scenarios, then maybe calculus and philosophy and a whole bunch of things were possible with that same thing, even though it wasn't derived for the purpose of calculus and philosophy.
Totally. And so it's a kind of a compelling story, especially if you want to go the naturalistic route. How do we come to reason at all? Okay, here's an explanation. And Peterson's is really interesting because he has these maps of meaning. He has the mapping mechanisms in our brain. Like that's a good story as far as naturalistic stories go. I think the problem here, so there's two ways that I wanted to attack Peterson's, what I call it the ladder of development, is one's through a local skeptical threat, and then one through a global skeptical threat. So the local skeptical threat is targeting certain beliefs. So this is from Thomas Crisp in his paper, where is it? Oh, on naturalistic metaphysics in the Blackwell Companion to Naturalism. So, I mean, this made it into the companion to naturalism. So naturalists have seen this. They're not cool with it. They're going to argue against it, but it's not like some fringy type thing. A local skeptical threat, it's targeting just a certain subset of beliefs. A global skeptical threat, it's going to Plantinga's argument that we already covered a little bit, that's going to go at all of our beliefs. So I wanted to start with the lighter one, the one that with less a smaller target. And here I use Thomas Crisp's argument, and I go at Peterson's abstract metaphysical beliefs. So the spandrel type stuff. So maybe we grant that the first half of Peterson's story about abstract map making, like that could make sense. The less evolved us, they could have this ability to map things out in their mind. Okay, that's cool. It's the problem comes when you want to spandrelize abstract reasoning about metaphysical beliefs. So why think that just because you can have an accurate or a reliable map of your neighborhood and where you can find the fruit, why think that that ability would then produce reliable beliefs concerning metaphysical things, abstract metaphysical beliefs? Why think that at all? So Chris goes on to say that the probability would be inscrutable. There's no way to tell whether that would be reliable or not reliable. If that's the case, Peterson's project is a project in abstract metaphysical reasoning. Like it's naturalistic metaphysics. So if there's no reason, whether for or against the reliability of our abstract metaphysical reasoning, if you can't tell whether it's reliable or not, then why should you trust it? And so if Peterson's project is right, then I think he's given you no reason to trust our ability to assess his project, because his project is a project in abstract naturalistic metaphysics. But his project also says we have no way to tell whether our beliefs about such things are reliable or not.
So what if someone were to push back and try and say, well, the ability to develop a map of how to find fruit trees in my neighborhood while avoiding saber-toothed tigers, that ability relies on me being able to make something like a physical universe simulator, right? Because it's basically like you can play a video game in your head, and hopefully the video game corresponds close enough with reality to be useful, right? There needs to be some correspondence between how I simulate imagined courses of action and their outcomes, and what those courses of action and their outcomes actually would look like in the real world. There needs to be some, at least, correlation between the predicted outcome and the realized outcome in order for such a thing to be useful. And if I am generating this thing, it has physics in it. And if it has physics in it, the whole system, the whole simulator in my head must have metaphysics about the physics in order for it to be right. And so therefore the metaphysical things have to, again, also at least approximate the thing. Does that argument get around the problem, or is it still vulnerable to the problem?
I think it's still vulnerable to the problem. And I think an easy way to see this is just to pick up any history of philosophy textbook. And you see that there's lots and lots of abstract metaphysical beliefs that can cohere with our daily experiences. Like you can tell lots of different stories for that. Lots of them have been wrong, and lots of them have disagreed with each other. And yet they weren't insane. Some of them are kind of insane, but I can see why you would think that idealism is true. Yeah, maybe we're all just ideas. Okay, but now here's an argument against it. And so their metaphysics is wild. It's all over the place. And so I don't see any reason at all to think that there's one metaphysic that is so, well, it's just not. It's historically not true. There hasn't been one that's emerged that this one is the obviously true one, and why would anyone argue against it at all? No, just look at any history of philosophy textbook. Like it changes and it goes, and we have more established facts and stuff like that now, but that's also assuming that our cognitive faculties are reliable when it comes to abstract reasoning on such things. But that assumption is not one that you can make if our abstract metaphysical capacities were an accidental byproduct. If they've been designed to think that way by a God who wanted us to think his thoughts after him, wanted us to know him, wanted us to think about the world and its creation, sure, yeah, and they could be reliable. But if that was an accidental byproduct of something else, how do we know the reliability? How can we even test the reliability? Like, what kind of argument could you give to say it's good or it's bad? It's an accidental byproduct.
Yeah. So So the sheer diversity of metaphysical speculation over the ages is a difficulty for that idea.
I
And
think so.
seemingly Aristotle and Plato and the Stoics were generally behaving similarly.
They were
and
surviving, right?
and they left similar numbers of children.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem, perhaps maybe, at the end of the day, Stoicism and Epicureanism and cynicism and stuff like that lead to different behavioral patterns that, actually I could kind of buy that with at least Epicureanism. They didn't seem to be very good at having children.
Sure.
but at least, there's enough variety in people who seem to be more or less doing and behaving similarly and reproducing similarly, that it kind of throws that into doubt.
Now, one thing that people have brought up to me is they'll say, well, okay, Crisp's argument's pretty good, but why think that this applies? Like, why think that Peterson's doing abstract metaphysics? It seems like he's doing, he wants to be doing psychology, maybe some philosophy or whatever. But I deal with that in the paper, but I think it's worth making explicit that the ladder of development is a metaphysical process. Speculation. Sure. Yeah, that's a good one. So just again, here's another quote on the ladder of development. Peterson says each developmental stage, and then he gives the stages: action, imitation, play, ritual, drama, narrative, myth, religion, philosophy, rationality, offers an increasingly abstracted, generalized, and detailed representation of the behavioral wisdom embedded in and established during the previous stage. So these are ascending stages up. That's why I call it the ladder of development, because as mankind is developing, there's ascending each rung of this developmental ladder. So, okay, that it seems like maybe it's not metaphysics. I could see why someone would say that. But then Tom Crisp gives this definition of naturalistic metaphysics, which I think is really helpful. He says, naturalistic metaphysics, let us say, is metaphysics such that the structures that it postulates to explain the appearances are populated entirely by natural entities, forces, and processes. Entities, forces, and processes completely describable without appeal to a mind or minds whose activities explain the origin, structure, and ongoing existence of the cosmos. And such is the project of explaining the mental, the moral. The ladder of development is especially meant to develop, to explain the moral, though it also explains the mental, and the physical in naturalistic terms. Naturalistic metaphysics. It's the attempt to get behind the mental, moral, and physical appearances to understand the nature and structure of realities underlying them, all while postulating only natural entities, forces, and processes. Okay, so that clearly describes Peterson's project. He's describing the mental, the moral, and the physical by naturalistic terms only. He's not postulating a mind. He's not talking about theistic evolution here. And I don't even think he's leaving it open for that. He might say that today. He might say, well, look, I don't think his work in Maps of Meaning is doing that. I don't think that was his intention. He even wrote this letter to his father. I think because he's so wedding it to naturalistic evolution, I think he kind of cuts himself off from pulling in it's theistic evolution as well. You can, I don't think that's his project at all.
Right. I sometimes wonder if he is more open to, supernaturalism or something beyond the material and stuff like that than he lets on. I think sometimes part of the reason why he kind of stays so material is it's almost like an evangelical technique to reach atheists or something like that, to stay in their box, right? And to speak their language and to not lose credibility with them.
Sure.
Like at the end of the day, I think he still cares what Sam Harris thinks about him,
Definitely.
right? That sort of thing. But sometimes I wonder if in his own privacy, he escapes those confines that he kind of puts on himself in public. But that's not entirely germane to your argument. That's more of just, I wonder about that aspect.
I wonder the same thing. I wonder the same thing. And I understand that. And if he is doing that, I understand that as well. It's just, it also makes sense if you don't have the conviction if you're not a theist, a full-blown supernaturalist, why wouldn't you try to naturalize everything? Of course.
Mhm.
Yeah, of course. That's trying to play, because he's, again, like you said, he's trying to be a little evangelistic. And I think his goal is to evangelize people on the um the usefulness of myths,
Yeah,
right?
and to
And
give
that,
them meaning, right? He's
right.
an evangelist of meaning,
Sure.
even not like he has the answer to what meaning is,
Hmm.
but he wants to give people a sense and a, I don't know, a participation in meaning, right?
Yeah.
Nihilism is people who don't feel like they have meaning, but people who, have meaning are happier in life. So he's trying to boost up meaning. So he's trying to reach people who are in that very physicalist, very materialistic nihilism,
Hmm.
and kind of use tools that they would agree with and not have any, hesitancy using to kind of build up meaning in individuals
Right.
that way. I think that really is something like his self-identified project.
Yeah. And so with that project, he wants to naturalize things as much as he can to win as many over as he can. And
Mhm.
again, giving him the benefit of the doubt and listening to him and stuff, he wants to save people's lives. Like he knows how important meaning is. He tears up every time he talks about this.
Yeah.
How many people said, I was going to kill myself. I listened to your lecture, and now me and my dad are friends again, and I've
Mhm.
forgiven him. Or I had PTSD, and you talked about evil, and that helped me understand what I was doing, and whatever it is,
Or like you
tons.
said about, the dragon with
For
10,000
sure.
eyes watching you and social
Yeah.
anxiety, right? That sort of thing.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
And so it makes sense. I just want to say, like, it makes sense. I don't think he's an idiot or anything like that. It makes sense that he would want to naturalize these things. I just think in doing so, he's cutting off his own project.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about sort of the local skepticism threat and the local skepticism thing, as we were talking specifically about his kind of simulation origin of the account of reason, right?
Mhm.
We play a video game in our head to see how it goes so that we can find good outcomes and bad outcomes and avoid bad courses of action and choose good courses of action without having to explore it in our bodies
Right.
first. When we might get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, we
Right.
can have, Sam inside my head, the Mario inside my head. Oh, that Mario got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. I'm
Right.
not going to do that. That one didn't. I'm going to do that, right? That's sort of his account of reason. And you kind of poked at some local skepticism for that idea. But what's the kind of greater, more global skepticism problem that you think he still has?
Yeah. And so this maps on to Plantinga's argument, his full blown EAAN, Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism. And I think the a lot of people want to go with the local one because we want to give people the benefit of the doubt, because um it's less scary and
It's less
crazy
mean.
to. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. um and it's more intuitive. You can kind of go along with them and say, yeah, maybe we have these lower level things. But the global one is fun because it's just like everything. Like, if this is true, everything that you think is wrong, or you can't trust anything that you believe, including that theory, and so you should not trust that theory. So the reason that the way that I'm able to use the global threat is from a quote that we read earlier from Peterson. I'll just read it again. He says, behavior is imitated, then abstracted into play, formalized into drama and story, crystallized into myth, and codified into religion, and only then criticized in philosophy and provided post hoc, after the fact, with rational underpinnings. Explicit philosophical statements regarding the grounds for, and the nature of ethical behavior, stated in a verbally comprehensible manner, were not established through rational endeavor. And that's a really big problem, that our moral and rational beliefs were not established by a rational process. And so this is something C.S. Lewis talks about a lot in his book Miracles. He says we can always have reason coming from other reason. If I convince you of something and you convince someone else of it, and you can kind of trace that back, oh, it was a process of reasoning. That's fine. But if you have reason coming from non-reason, that's where C.S. Lewis says you have to cry halt. And so if you believe that your cognitive, we've broached this already. If you believe that your cognitive faculties were produced, not aimed at truth, but aimed at survival beliefs, and only then later can you come along and rationally, post hoc or ad hoc, give an explanation for them. Why think that you can actually give that rational explanation? Why think that's a rational explanation at all? This process is aimed at survival. It's not a rational process. It's not in accord with the laws of reason, excluded middle and non-contradiction. It's not in accord with those. It's in accord with the laws of physics. And so here's where it gets a little bit closer to C.S. Lewis's argument from reason. Why trust the laws of physics to produce truth? Like the laws, this kind of some creationists will use this as well. Why think that a tornado will blow through a brickyard and never?
I remember that one.
That's right. Exactly. Another really intuitive and helpful little scenario I like to think of. Richard Taylor, I think a philosopher, came up with this one. But if you're on a tram, train, whatever, and you look out the window, and in white stones on this hillside says, "Welcome to Disney World." There's a couple different ways that could have happened. One is someone could have spelled that out, welcoming you to Disney World. Another is an accident, though super improbable. It could have happened. The truck spills a bunch of rocks and it spells out, "Welcome to Disney World." If you believe that someone is trying to convey a message to you, you can read that for content and go, "Oh, I must be approaching Disney World." Or you could say, "Look, I'm in the middle of Ohio. This is not Disney. Like someone's just messing with me or whatever. It's a joke." I can read it for content. If you look out there and you postulate or you theorize, whatever, that happened by accident. Or someone told you, "Oh no, I know it looks like that, but old, Johnson there spilled all his rocks and it just crazy coincidence." Then if you were to read that for content, you'd be so silly. "Oh, I wonder if I'm approaching Disney World or not." No, that was an accident. Don't read that for content. That doesn't make sense. So the second scenario is what Peterson, his project, gives us. It's this accident, and yet you're reading it for content. Our reasoning capacities were produced by accident as a spandrel, as a consequence that wasn't the target of the process. And not even was it not a target, but it goes against it, because sometimes the truth doesn't help us survive. If you're going to look at that reasoning faculty as if it's producing truth, then you're in the place of someone reading the white stones, but believing it happened by accident.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the universal axe to the trunk, mm-hmm. that kind of cuts off not just the simulator theory of reason, but like almost all of the propositional content of our head, if we were to take it seriously. And it's almost like it's uncanny if you think about it too long. It gets kind of disturbing if I'm honest.
Right. And so the conclusion of the argument is not that we should doubt all of our senses or anything like that, but we should doubt the theory that gives doubt to all of our theorizing. Mm-hmm. Like if you have this theory and it cuts you off at the trunk, that's not the right theory. Like if you have a reason, and you actually can't rationally affirm that. So even if it were true, I don't think you can rationally affirm that, because it destroys all your rational affirmations.
Mm-hmm. And this is what I think is really interesting. So I saw Richard Dawkins and Bret Weinstein in Chicago. They came to Chicago, and this was back when the IDW might still actually kind of have been a thing that was going to have live events and tour all over the world, talking about interesting things. And there was actually a really good conversation between Bret and Richard Dawkins. And a lot of it was about, is religion evil, or did religion evolve because it was useful, right? This was kind of there were a couple topics, but that was one of the main topics of the conversation, because Richard Dawkins has come out relatively strongly against religion being useful or good in any capacity whatsoever, under any circumstance. And Bret Weinstein, who's also an evolutionary biologist, was like, well, hey, it must have gotten here for a reason, right? It must have evolved. Like, when we look at when we judge other things to see if they came through the process of evolution, we look, are they widespread? Do they provide some benefit for those who do it? And do they do it despite some cost, right? If there's a cost to it, but they do it anyway, then there must be a reason. And does it persist for long periods of time? All of those sorts of things that an evolutionary biologist would use to measure whether something is the product of evolution or whether it's just an accident. Religion passes all of those tests. Like virtually every human society has religious activities of some kind. They're often very expensive, like sometimes even including human sacrifice of your own babies.
Right.
There has to be usefulness somewhere in there, was sort of Bret's point. And he honestly even got Richard Dawkins to bend the knee a little bit. But I think still at the end of the day, Bret Weinstein, he has his metaphorical truth versus literal truth distinction. And it's very much similar to what you were talking about with the frog example. Do frogs eat flies because they think they're going to turn into princes? Right? Or are they just deluding themselves, but they're deluding themselves in the direction of usefulness? And I think that Bret basically thinks that all of religion is a useful delusion. But one thing that Jordan Peterson will do, and honestly, he's sometimes inconsistent with this, right? And this is why I think your arguments still hold up. But like when in the first podcast that Jordan Peterson ever did with Sam Harris, they spent like 2 hours, driving each other crazy, talking about the definition of truth.
I love that episode, by the way. That was one of my favorites.
I know it's like terrible and awesome at the same time. but Jordan Peterson drives really hard in a pragmatic direction with truth, right? And so like what I said, so Christians go to church, right, because they think that it will help them inherit eternal life or something like that. Or that, Christians try and behave morally because they think that an all-knowing God is watching and judging all of their actions or something like that, right? And that they'll be held to account after they die, right? And you can imagine atheists thinking that's as silly as a frog thinking that eating flies is going to turn them into a crown prince. Or something like that. But yet it nevertheless generates these behaviors that, they actually behave morally, and that helps them cooperate better as a social group, and they build social ties, and they earn trust, and they stay away from dangerous things like alcohol and drugs or, whatever, right? And they don't have kids outside of wedlock, they have kids inside wedlock, right? Like all of these things, there's all of these beneficial evolutionary behaviors that are generated from this crazy belief about a God that's judging them and how they, get on the good side of that God. And Peterson will say, like, the more useful something is, you can't separate usefulness from truth, right? Truth is usefulness. And like sometimes he goes that way and sometimes he doesn't. And I feel like a way that Peterson's best option for escaping the EAAN problem is to just lean hardcore into pragmatism. Just truth is usefulness, right? So my true beliefs, they might have evolved just because they're useful, but that's all I'm saying by true. Is that thinking these things makes me do the right behaviors, and that's what I mean by true. So Richard Dawkins, I don't care if you think it's silly that I think that there's a God in the sky who's going to judge me after I die, and that I better go to church and I better read my Bible. I don't care if you think that that's silly. It generates the behavior that seems to work, so I'm doing it, and that's all that I'm trying to say by true. But then he ends up in this very pragmatic, confines of what it means to be true.
Well, and that's why I love that episode so much. I love conversations on truth just in general, but Peterson made these really great points about Harris being not thoroughly Darwinistic enough, especially in his theory of truth. And then Harris just was hammering Peterson because Harris studied under the great pragmatist, I can't think of his name right now, at Harvard, I believe. I would look so smart if I could remember his name.
Percy, but no, that's too.
No,
He was
no,
too
no.
long ago.
Oh man, he was a contemporary of Donald Davidson. It doesn't matter. But Harris has a lot of practice going at pragmatism.
Pragmatist. Yeah.
A philosopher, right? So not even Peterson's not a philosopher, and so he knows what he's talking about. And so he kept pushing him and saying, Jordan, how do we know when it's true? Like, we don't have the end result. So let's say in 200 years or whatever, and humankind, through all of their machinations, blows up the world. Then were all of those theories that produced that bomb that blew up the world, were they all false? And Peterson's like, well, you have to look at the result, like, in a sense, yes. And it was like,
But
he
we
was
never
showing-
have the result.
yeah, he was showing like the absurdity of pragmatist theory as well. Like, there's all sorts of problems with that. So if you were to dive in there, is something true because it's pragmatic for humanity or for the individual or for the society? If you have this belief that helps you survive, and I have a contrary belief, direct contrary belief, and it helps me survive, how can they both be true? You know what I mean? Like, because the survival is the test of truth. Well, then you have all sorts of actual contradictions. And if your theory gives you just a plethora, there's some theories of subclassical logic which allow for certain contradictions in a system. We're talking about billions of contradictions in this system. It doesn't seem like that's a theory of truth any longer. And so I think the pragmatic theory of truth would exacerbate these problems for Peterson rather than like help him get out of them. Yeah, it's diving in deeper and saying that the frog's belief about being a prince is true. But then you say, well, Peterson, do you think he's going to turn into a prince? Like, that's the question you have to ask when you have to jump out.
And then Peterson will say, well, I think the frog should act as if he thinks that.
Right.
And that's how he kind of translates between pragmatic truth and sort of, I don't know, rational truth or something like that, is he should act as if it's true, right? And that's when he says, I act as if God exists. I act as if I'm a frog that believes that I can turn into a prince if I eat enough flies.
And this is the problem with like, let's say we were, I don't know, spandrelized or whatever. Let's say that we did live in this story that Peterson tells. The problem is we're self-conscious now, we're self-aware, and we can use this reason to undermine the whole process. I can say, I don't care what's good for me, I want to do this. Yeah, I can step back from the river, right? We're all in this like river going upwards. I can step out and say, I don't want to do that anymore. And so you can step out and say, yeah, sure, I see that acting as if this or that would be helpful, but I don't want to. I want to know what's true. I want to know what's real. Maybe I don't care about survival as much as I care about the truth. And we're able to say that because we're rational beings.
That's a very good point.
So yeah, when the rising tide lifts all the ships, one ship goes above and says, hey, I'm going to get out of the ocean right now. It's dangerous here, or whatever. I want to go up into the Great Lakes. I don't know. There's all these analogies, but we have the capacity to do that. And I think Peterson sees that and is worried about that and saying, don't throw off all these myths because now we're cognizant. But that's the problem with the theory. Like, you can step out of this, and Peterson can step out, but he won't. He won't say whether he believes there is a God or there's not a God. And I know his reasonings, and some of them are pretty noble. Like, if I were to express that, then I have to change my life. Well, you should express that, and you should change your life, right? But I understand, and I think he is like virtuous in that respect. But there's still the fact of the matter, and this is why pragmatic theory of truth just completely fails. There's facts out there, and our beliefs are true if they correspond to reality. And one of the alluring things of pragmatic theory of truth is that it wants to have this strong connection between reality and our beliefs, but the connection is survival. It's not truth oriented. And so
and that's where Peterson could just go full-blown pragmatist and avoid the EAAN problem.
But then he better stop writing books, though, right?
Right. But then he really it seems to undercut what we feel like is the good faithness of rational discussion or something like that.
And
It's
his
just
whole
this
ladder of development.
it's like this animalistic, like, I'm just doing what I feel, I'm just doing what I'm inherited, I'm trusting it. I have my tradition, I have my impulses, I have my psychological, mythological archetypes that are guiding me, and I don't need to explain this, I don't need to justify it, I'm just going to do it, I'm just going to eat the flies because all the frogs before me have told me that they think that it turns me into a prince. So, full blazes, I don't care what you say, truth is what works, this works, and I can't improve it.
I don't think you can do this either. I don't think you can go full blown, because you're still there looking at the frog. There's still someone describing the facts of the matter, that this frog is not really going to become a frog prince and blah, blah. So Peterson is still writing a book saying, this is how we got here. Well, Peterson, do you want me to believe that's how we got here? Or should I believe as if that's how we got here? Because you're writing this book as a matter of fact, right?
Yes,
you're writing this letter,
ladder
of development. And so it's the same thing. It's the same kind of criticism of like Jacques Derrida and the deconstructionist movement, to say you can't trust what's in the text. Well, you just wrote that in a book and you're asking me to trust it, right? It's kind of a self-defeating proposition. And I that's the same kind of self-defeat I think is apparent in Peterson's project, so long as he continues to have it as a naturalistic evolutionary theory.
Yeah. So how do you think that Peterson could or should get out of this?
He could just become a theistic evolutionist and say, this was guided. It was directed towards truth. Yeah, it was directed survival as well. But God ordained whether he becomes a theist or a deist, and says, well, God set up the initial conditions that would aim human beliefs at truth. I think that one might not work.
Right.
Like, I'm
well,
not a deist,
you need something from above, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that Peterson's just completely trying to build up. He's trying to build his ladder to heaven, his ladder of ascent up to heaven. But is that a Tower of Babel? Is that Jacob's ladder, or is that the Tower of Babel?
That's a great way to put it.
To use his own biblical archetype.
That's okay. So Daniel Dennett always talks about this, and he actually criticizes other naturalists and says they're not sufficiently naturalistic because a lot of their theories allow for this top down, this sky hook, when we should be building cranes. A crane comes from the bottom, and that's where all generates its force, whatever, and it picks things up, but it's rooted in the ground, like not literally, but it's connected to the ground. Where a skyhook just comes from the sky. And one of my friends, Jim Slagle, wrote this amazing book called The Epistemological Skyhook, and he's arguing against all these different theories of mind, which do try to build from the material up. And they're great arguments, and he's pulling from a bunch of great philosophers, but he's saying necessarily we need this skyhook. We need something to come from above. Otherwise, we have epistemological self-defeat, like Peterson's, like I think Peterson's project falls to. So you do exactly what you said. You need a skyhook. You need something coming down to us, and all that. Like if you have God who designed our cognitive faculties, even through a process of evolution, I think you avoid all of these, because you can just say, yes, my cognitive faculties don't produce pure truth, but they're generally reliable because God intended us to have these types of thoughts. Well, why? We can tell all sorts of stories about that. He wanted us to know him. He wanted us to successfully navigate the world, as well as ponder about mathematics, which would help us design rockets and whatever, to take over the rest of the solar system.
It'll eventually anchor in God's power and goodness, right? There's a God who had the power to design things this way, and he was good enough to design it in such a way that we can trust in, right? And it's honestly, it's very similar to Descartes, right? Like, Rene Descartes is like, man, I'm going to go into my epistemological clean house. All right. Okay. I think, therefore I am. All right. I at least have my own existence and stuff like that. And then the first problem that he runs into is like, well, can I trust my cognitive faculties or not? what if my mind is in a vat being controlled by an evil demon who wants me to think all the wrong things? And then he gets out of that with the ontological argument, which is always the strangest and most controversial, but yet somehow most enduring argument for God. That's like, imagine, the most perfect being, who's better than every other possible being. Well, it's better to exist than to not exist, so therefore the perfect being must exist. And it's always like, wait, is that step allowed, or can you do that, or can you not do that? Does that step work, or is that the leap of faith right there, or is that actually a logical argument that reasons should follow? And I feel like Peterson needs something like the ontological argument to get him to open up to a emanation from heaven, essentially, that can justify his intellectual project. And I think you could almost imagine something like, there's a hierarchy of meaningful stories, right? And he seems fairly convinced when he talks to Jonathan Pageau that the Christian story is the grandest of all possible moral visions, right? I think he said that to Jonathan Pageau. Okay, well, the grandest of all possible moral visions would be true and not just imaginary. So therefore, the grandest possible vision is true, or something like that, right? Like like a meaning-based ontological argument to allow him to trust that the ladder is actually coming down from heaven, and that instead of him having to build a crane, right? There actually is a skyhook instead of a crane.
That's a really, so I've thought about that. I wrote my master's thesis on the authorial analogy for the God-world relation, that God's an author, we live in the story. And I did that partially with Peterson in mind. I prepare as if I'm going to talk to Peterson or Ben Shapiro or Joe Rogan. Like, I prepare that way. I'm probably never going to. But if I do, I think I'll, thank you, man. I'll bring you on too. But I want to talk with them, but also I want to be a good guest. And if I can talk with them, I can, whatever. But I wrote this thesis with Peterson in mind, kind of like what you're talking about, though I don't know if I thought of it as an ontological argument, which is a really interesting insight. But, hero with 10,000 faces, all the Jungian archetypes type stuff, that's a question I've always had for Peterson, is why not, like, if that is so valuable, if that's so ingrained in us, you can go one of two routes. You can go, well, that's just this evolutionary process that's helped us, and Christianity is just another wave in that. It's just another one of those stories of the hero's journey. Or you could say the hero's journey is the archetype, Christ's journey is the archetype, and God let that reverberate throughout creation and history for the explicit purpose of us recognizing it when it comes, or because that is the greatest story you could tell. And so every good story is going to follow that pattern.
And the best possible story is true. Because it's better for a story to be true than false. And so if we can imagine the greatest possible story, then the greatest possible story must also be a true story. Boom, ontological argument sort of thing. And then, because that's sort of like the argument, like, Bret Weinstein, when he's talking to Richard Dawkins, Bret Weinstein's like, hey, religion must be useful or else we wouldn't all be doing it, Richard. It's not just an evil delusion. It's not just an evil thing that is ruining human civilization. It must be useful for civilization. But the way that Bret Weinstein avoids the conclusion that therefore we should be religious is he thinks that evolution is evil, right? I talked about this in my conversation with John Vervaeke, that he basically has a Gnostic, cosmology where he thinks the evil God of evolution made us, so therefore we need to rebel against the evil God, right? So he thinks that evolution is like this force that leads us away, and that somehow we got reason and consciousness, and that isn't from evolution, and we're going to use that to transcend evolution. I don't think that story ultimately makes sense. But one thing that you could do, so imagine I'm talking to an atheist and he's never thought about the idea, well, hey, religion must have evolved for a reason, and so therefore you should be religious. The thing that needs to happen is you need to decide that I'm going to do what evolution wants me to do, right? And how can I trust that what evolution has caused is good? And then that's a question that is the EAAN problem that we've been talking about this whole time, right? It runs into that same roadblock.
Yeah.
If you try and evangelize that way. And that's exactly the roadblock you're talking about. And that exactly seems to be where the trap that Peterson can't escape.
And that it has hints of like Pascal's wager, right? And it's like, okay, so it's just an updated Pascal's wager. If you're an evolutionist, look at religion, look at the majority of the world, they're religious. I guess you'd have to block off some of the critiques.
You could even say, well, which religion's been the most successful? Well, there's more Christians than any other religion, so we'll say that.
And you could look at the culture. You can make the cultural apologetic type thing. Look at the culture that Christianity produces, and those are tricky arguments and stuff. But if you followed along so far, then you get to this point that you're talking about, where you say, okay, so either now you're acting as if there is a God, and you're acting as if this God produced your cognitive faculties by way of theistic evolution, guided evolution. Either there is a God behind that or not. And if there is not, then you should not trust this process, but not just this process, all the way back. You shouldn't trust any of your cognitive faculties. Or there is a God behind this, and he has used guided evolution in order to get you to have reliable cognitive faculties, which can produce true beliefs. Now, you still have to examine all your beliefs to see if they're true or not, but that at least that path is open. The other one is completely closed and actually self-defeating. So once you've got on this path, you get to this dead end, and you have to follow up the other one. And then you can even go on to consider, hey, is the earth young or old? Like, now that I believe in God, and but that's a really interesting proposition, man. I like that.
Right. You either have to go the Cartesian path, right, of some kind of ontological-ish sort of thing to trust it, or the Pascal path of wager. But the weirdest part of Pascal's wager, and he addresses this question, is, okay, Pascal, I say that you're right, that it is better to believe in God than to not, or to kind of update it to the thing that we're talking about. Let's say that I have decided that Christianity has been produced by the process of evolution and is the most reliable, trustworthy guide of how to navigate into the future. Let's say, okay, yeah, I agree, I should go to church on Sunday, and I should behave according to the moral code of Christianity, because that has been produced as the most reliable path to my survival and the survival of my children and community. Okay, let's say that I have done that. How do I can't choose myself to believe in God, right? That seems above and beyond my own volition. Can I actually leap the way Pascal, or can I actually leap the way Kierkegaard suggests that I should if Pascal is right? Can I make myself believe in God even if I accept the conclusion that I quote unquote should? Or can I just act as if? Can I just go to church? Can I just, not have sex before marriage, right? Yeah. Why not just do the stuff but not believe the content?
Well, so
why not just eat the flies but doubt the prince?
Because of the evolutionary argument against naturalism, I think that's what's goading you on further and further. Like, what do you believe? Peterson makes really good points about you can't really control what you believe, but you have to like manipulate yourself into believing certain things. And I think
that's what Pascal says. He says, just do it, and I bet that you'll start believing it after a while.
Yeah, it's fake it till you make it type stuff, which is interesting. But I think you can actually, there's a theory in epistemology, doxastic voluntarism, that you have more voluntary control over some of your beliefs, and you can choose to believe something or not. I actually don't want that to be true. I don't want you to just be able to believe the earth is flat tomorrow against all your rest. I don't like that. Maybe we do. I don't think so. But you can actually do things like in a Pascalian way to put yourself in a place to believe. And it's not just believing against belief. It's actually researching the evolutionary argument against naturalism, EAAN, and saying, okay, wait, I have a couple options here. I'm going to destroy the other options through these arguments. And now I'm pushed in. So it's not an active role of saying, I want to believe this. It's this negative role of eliminating the opposition and helping yourself to believe. So I think it's better than just I'm going to fake it till I make it. It's I'm examining these theories, and this one can't be true. Otherwise, I can't even do the examination that I'm doing right now. So that one's out. So therefore, by default, I have this one.
Yeah. So you can process of elimination it that way. Yeah.
And it's different than just forcing yourself to believe, right? Because I don't want to force myself to believe.
But even then, say I've process of eliminated naturalistic evolution, and that I feel like, well, either I have to, I don't know, radically doubt everything I ever think, or I can go a theistic evolution or some sort of similar thing out. It's still like, can I make myself do that? Or it's like, how does the intellectual act of reaching a conclusion actually convince yourself back? How does like logicking forward get to logicking back into what's actually behind you and in you? And that's sort of that rider and elephant thing. And this is where I can't help but feel that the Calvinists are a little bit right. I'm not very Calvinistic myself, although I sometimes am. I think that they have points. And this is one where it seems like, in the same sort of way that epistemology kind of needs, the skyhook to ever really work at the end of the day, the actual convincing seemingly needs to be an act of grace that's God reaching down into, that I'm not sure if there's any substitute for that.
Yeah, well, so I'm a Calvinist, and pretty hardcore Calvinist, but also, like, I did work on the authorial analogy, which says, God's the author. That's pretty hardcore Calvinistic, and yet he wrote this story in which I do things for reasons. I have reasons for them, and if he plants a reason in me that's not mine, I'm not responsible for that. If it doesn't make any sense in my causal history and it just plopped in there, and maybe that's okay when it comes to salvation, because I don't
right, because that's how salvation is supposed to work, right?
Yeah. Right, but I think it still makes sense within the story, even within even Paul's conversion. He'd slapped him down from the ground, but it still makes sense. He's still this religious Jew who is really fervent, and so I think God's a good storyteller, and I think that if he were to Deus ex machina everyone, it actually wouldn't fit within the story. So I'm with you, because I'm a Calvinist, right? I think it's grace, for sure, but it's not grace, which destroys the story, which doesn't make sense, which has no place in the plot. So it still makes sense within the plot that I would become a Christian, given all my circumstances, given my full story and everything. And yet I can't take responsibility for it, but God has given me reasons, and he's presented me with arguments, and not everything's so cognitive, right? But beautiful music, and I've appreciated the old hymns and all that type of stuff. I forgot where I was going with this, because you had a really interesting point about grace.
To me, I feel like the problem is like, imagine I'm trying to figure out who I should marry. And okay, there's these 5 girls in my life that are plausible candidates, right? And then, okay, I like this trait, and this trait. Okay, that eliminates them. All right, okay, that's the one girl that I should marry. All right, I've come to the conclusion, sort of logically, that the pragmatic best I've done the simulations in my head, and this is the one that I should do. But does that make me fall in love with her? Right? The
analogy, falling in love is different, right, than just
right. It's like there's and that's where I can't help but feel like the faith and reason thing it's that having faith in God is a little bit more like falling in love with God than it is like rationally saying, okay, I'm on The Bachelor, right? And there are 20 girls or however many, and after rounds and rounds and rounds, I've filtered all the ones out, and I've chosen this as the best one, but do I actually love her, right? Can I actually fall in love with her?
So I think that's a great point, and that's a distinction between like believing in God and having faith in God, right? So like you can use inference to the best explanation to come. You can use all sorts of different arguments and stuff to come to believe in God, and yet the the Bible says that demons believe in God. They know
Yeah.
Jesus, and yet they tremble, right? And
Yes.
so that's a whole different aspect of the loving relationship, that biblical knowledge of God, of a personal relationship. I always use LeBron James, but like I can come to know that LeBron James exists, and I believe in LeBron James. Like I know him. I know him as his public figure and persona, but I don't know him. Like he doesn't know me, right? And that's a terrifying thing. Jesus says, I never knew you. Depart from me, worker of lawlessness. Like I don't know you, right? So yeah, I think this whole time we've been talking about the propositional knowledge of believing that God exists, having that true belief. Whereas there's that's like so low, such a low bar, because demons believe that, but I don't know, you got to know the Lord, like know him as a person. And we talked about knowing how knowledge that Peterson talks about, and then knowing that knowledge. There's also like a personal knowledge, a know whom type knowledge. And that's what we're getting at here, that's, I know you, I know some facts about you, but we know each other like as persons. And that's so much more important when it comes to God than just that he exists.
All right. Well, I think that might be the right place to end for now. But this was a really good discussion. I was really excited to talk to you about this, and this was really fun.
Yeah, dude, I had a great time. I would love to do some more of this. I love talking Peterson, God, planning, like, and you obviously know what you're talking about too. So it was really fun to talk with someone who.
Yeah, well, thank you for putting in the work and writing that paper and thinking really hard about this. And thanks for coming on my show today, Parker.
Definitely.